Welcome to the Bible Made Clear. So today we're actually here way up in the north in Maine at on location at Herb Butterworth's home. And Herb has graciously offered to feed me, so I figured I'd do an interview with him. We wanted to talk about a couple of things that we feel are very important to apologetics and the Christian life. So I had just put up a couple of videos, part 1 and 2, on the evidence for the resurrection. Now, obviously that's an important subject for us as Christians, especially where most of the attacks against Christianity by schooled skeptics tend to attack the resurrection directly. If they can't provide, which there's no evidence on their part, but if they can't provide some evidence that Jesus didn't exist as an actual person in history, then what they try to do is they try to discount the resurrection. And so my first question to Herb regarding that would be, what do you think, Herb, is the big benefit of dealing with the resurrection apologetically?
I think apologetically, just looking at the resurrection. Well, of course, as Paul said, if Christ was not crucified and raised, then our faith is in vain. Our Christianity is useless. It's not true. It's a false religion. I think for me personally, I think probably for a lot of people, when you look at the resurrection, it's kind of a conclusion. When you look at all of apologetics, first of all, and establish the reality that a creator God does exist, that's the first step. And then once you come to realize that, if you just follow the facts, that there has to be a creator God. If you look at the different claims of all the various religions, there's nothing that stands up against Christianity. It's the only thing that really makes any sense. And you have to, as you did so well in your last video, look at the facts. And it bears it out. There's so much to witness for this as being true and being real. And I think that's what the most important thing in life for every human being who has ever lived is to believe in Jesus Christ.
So have you had the opportunity to actually, we've all witnessed for Christ. Most of us have as believers. And we typically go down rabbit trails with people. They'll mention something, and then we kind of get pulled along this path where it's just not an advantage. And to get to the resurrection is really the crucial issue. Have you ever had the opportunity to do that?
I've discussed it with people before, some non-believers, and let's face it, it's a tremendous claim that a man lived, was hung on a cross, executed, and then 3 days later he rose from the dead. That doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. So certainly it's a miraculous event, and any, as is often said, and you've heard yourself many times, if you make a fantastic claim, you have to have fantastic evidence to back it up. And I've used that before, and a lot of times I'll point out the Old Testament made this claim about Jesus, and we look here in the New Testament, and here's Jesus doing this very thing. One of the things, right off the bat, you just think of that he would be born in Bethlehem. And sure enough, he is. And we see, through the Psalms and the method of execution, how it went about, the things that happened. We see it all come to fruition in the New Testament. And that, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I've tried to share that with people. I can't say I've had great success sharing that with people, but I have tried.
One of the benefits of knowing prophecy in relation to Christ is the fact that blending the actual historical evidence with the prophetic evidence is very powerful because, we're in Bucksport, but if all of a sudden I said, hey, it's going to rain in Bucksport today, I get a 50-50 shot. Now, if I say it's going to rain in Bucksport in 1 year from 1 to 2 in the afternoon, but it's only going to be on the south side, every piece of information that I add to that makes it more difficult and much more specific for the target for it to be fulfilled. And the Bible, where it has so many, and I've gone through videos on this channel as well as I've written some pamphlets, and I've taught on the fact that Peter Stoner years ago in Texas, that professor, he ended up going through he picked out 8 prophecies regarding Christ, and effectively came out to the place where the mathematical chance factor that one person could accomplish 8 prophecies that could fulfill them is just mathematically impossible. Now, beyond that, there's hundreds for Christ's first coming, and then there'll be hundreds for his second coming. But when you combine the fact that you have these prophecies from the Old Testament brought into the New, and you have the historical verification that they were accomplished by the eyewitnesses that were there, this is very, very powerful evidence and testimony for the fact not only that it occurred, but now, again, there's layers here, right? So you add on the layer of people's lives being changed, the effectiveness of Christianity starting out from just really not the Three Stooges, but kind of the 11 Stooges at the beginning. I mean, these guys were just regular guys and were afraid, kind of running for their lives in a sense. And then all of a sudden, we see that Jesus changed their life, and they became a powerful dynamic for the start of Christianity. So putting these pieces together, it's not only one evidence, but it's the multiple pieces that end up laying a foundation, and you're really building a house there. Do you agree?
I agree with you. It is everything that you discuss on this channel on Bible Made Clear is really building a house. We discuss Scripture, what Scripture says, how it applies to our lives, the significance of it. You also talk a lot about apologetics, and I know you've explained how atheism just does not hold up, and I think that's very important. And that would be step one, establishing, as I mentioned earlier, step one in coming to a relationship with Jesus Christ is to first acknowledge that he exists and who he is, and we build from there. Once you establish it very simply that nothing produces nothing. So to produce something, you have to have something. And what would that something be? It has to be outside of time and space. Now we have no choice but to confess a creator God. And then once we do that, we say, who is this God? And you do all of these things in Bible Made Clear. And it's just a wonderful channel, wonderful opportunity for people to learn these things, figure these things out. And once you get to that point, I think it's there are so many things in a Christian's life. Any Christian can tell you that there are things that they cannot really use apologetically because it's very personal. And we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And he does things in our lives that cannot be explained in any other way. And I think it's a shame that so many people don't understand that, and they miss out on all of that. The most loving relationship they can ever have. They just throw it away. They don't value it. And I think we need a channel like this. We need a lot more lot, or there needs to be a lot more interaction with the channel, because I don't even know really how to describe how I feel about it, but people just need to come to this realization. And we pray about it all the time. We hate to see people not know their God, their Creator, and I pray for you, Scott, that you're empowered to go on with this. I know that you've been called to do this, and for me personally, it's just been a wonderful experience in the 3 years or so that you've had this channel on, and I pray that more people would take advantage of it and come to that faith. It's right there in front of them, right there. You don't have to stretch anything at all to know this. It's right there, and the resurrection is a very powerful tool if you just look into it. And as great of a claim as it is, as fantastic as a claim it is, it's very verifiable, and you can know it.
I mean, when I I appreciate Herb's non-paid claim for the channel, but
believe me, he doesn't pay.
Yeah. So when I got saved, I actually did not. I knew nothing about apologetics. I didn't even have. I actually didn't have evidence for the resurrection personally. I didn't know I got saved when I got saved. So when I came to Christ, I was alone in my bedroom. I was 24 years old, and basically I had been reading the Bible a little bit because of the place I was at in my life, and I started talking to God one night. I asked God to forgive me. I realized I was a sinner. I realized Jesus was going the opposite way that I was going, and I said, Jesus, I believe you're there if you forgive me and if you help me, because I realized I had tried to make changes in my life that I was never able to do. And I said, if you will help me, I'll follow you for the rest of my life. Now that was effectively, I guess, my sinner's prayer, asking God to forgive me. And I went to bed. Now when I woke up the next day, I was different. I don't know. Like Herb said, there's no way to quantify it. The evidence was that I unconsciously stopped doing things that were sinful. And then I consciously, over the coming weeks, stopped doing things that were sinful. I was no longer comfortable doing. So I was working for IBM at the time. This was in the early 80s, and working with a lot of smart people, very technical people. They thought I was a bit nuts, and so they started challenging me on why I believed what I believed. Now, I did not realize it, but that there was a ton of evidence out there, and so I actually went on a search for other people to try to bring into their life what was there, what was available. And as I did, I realized, oh my goodness, there's so much information here. It's like this, it's overwhelming. Now, with the advent of the internet and the ability, now there's a lot of junk on the internet, and who knows, some of you may think this is junk on the internet, but with a lot of the information that is valuable on the internet, the opportunity to discover anything that is true regarding Christianity is almost overwhelming. You have to actually kind of parse through the information and discard the stuff that's nonsense. But there's some really good channels on the internet for information, and there's some great authors. I mean, Gary Habermas. I still continually recommend Norm Geisler's work, especially in the areas of the resurrection and apologetics. I mean, Frank Turek does a great job. I mean, there's some really good people out there that are promoting Christianity, providing the evidence. But the evidence for the resurrection, we can clear away, in a sense, the misunderstandings of people, and that's really what apologetics is. It's the ability for us to take evidential information and reasonable information, information and evidence that is well reasoned out, historically verifiable, as well as logical, because that's how God designed us to think. We all think the same way, and it's not the result of biological evolution. And once you start putting these pieces together, you come up with actual evidence. Now, atheists are always making the claim every time I do something on this channel that they tell me that I'm making claims that are unsubstantiated and all this other stuff, and that's just a claim, and you're just trying to substantiate something that is that's not factual and everything else. And what I've tried to do, and quite frankly, a lot of times when I'm going to do any kind of video regarding atheism, I kind of bounce it off Herb. Herb reads all the atheists. Like he actually buys their books, which they should thank him for. But he buys their books and he reads them and he understands them. So, and a lot of them, he's read Dawkins and Stephen Hawking and others, and so in doing that, he has a good understanding of how they think. Now, what I'll do is I'll actually take my position, and then I'll bounce it off Herb, and then Herb takes the other position, and we do this over the phone. Obviously, I can't always drive up to Maine, but and then he'll help me actually work through some of my arguments against atheism. But that's what apologetics is. It's providing reasonable answers that have evidence behind them to clear away the problem of God's existence, to then get to the real issue, which is the resurrection and the gospel. And so, that's why we're talking about this right now. Is there anything else you want to say about the resurrection?
Just the power behind it. It's what we as Christians, it's everything to us. It's what it's all based on. I think it's interesting, we talk about the resurrection and a lot of people won't accept that. And we go back to, as you were mentioning about the atheists, and they just, they have a view that everything has to have a naturalistic explanation. And when we get into the supernatural, when we talk about God, Jesus, God creating the universe, they just despise that notion because it's not a naturalistic explanation. That's not to say they don't come up with some pretty absurd things. Yeah. We're talking about multiverse, megaverse, anything. Anything is reasonable.
Aliens.
Them. Aliens, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Panspermia, anything.
Yeah.
But it cannot be supernatural. They have to have a naturalistic explanation. All we would ask is that consider this as one option, like Stephen Meyer often does with people. Just he understands where they're coming from. He understands how they just have to have a naturalistic explanation. They don't have it, and they'll come up with everything. And he would just ask you to please just consider this as a possibility.
Yeah, he's kind.
He's kind.
He's very kind.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, you would think that with the discovery of DNA, that would have kind of sealed the deal, because Wilder Smith years ago, I watched him on a blackboard, and he said, he put up SOS on the blackboard. I steal that from him when I go through this with high school kids, but and he said, what does this mean? And somebody in the room said, save our souls, or we're in distress, we need help. And he said, but how do you know that? In other words, that's a code. He said, because codes are axiomatic of a language. There has to be something behind it. So the DNA code that we have learned how to anticipate what the next coded sequence is and everything else can only be done because there's a language behind it. the code is very sophisticated. So when you have a sophisticated code, you have to have a language that the code is based on. That's how computers work. It's the same thing. You can only have people learn C++ and other coded languages because there's a language behind it that the code is based on. And Meyer gets into that in Signature of the Cell, I believe.
Yeah, and also I was just, as you were describing that, I was thinking about Dembski and his specified complexity. And the SOS is a specified complexity. It has a meaning. It's not just arbitrary letters or numbers you could use and just thrown out there, which would have no meaning to anybody. There's a message and there's a receiver who understands the message, much like DNA. If DNA just had all their AETs, Gs, and just all arranged, but it didn't have a receiver of the message, that would all be for nothing. Adenine means nothing if you just have adenine out there. It has to have a receiver to do something with it. Is that kind of what?
Yeah, but that 4-letter alphabet in DNA,
Mm-hmm.
That ends up building something that the cell knows how to do something with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it's simplified. I'm not a scientist, and I don't even play one on TV. But the ability for people to understand a code means there has to be a language behind it, and languages are from minds. You need a mind to have a language. You need a mind to communicate information, dealing with specified complexity. So when you get into a lot of the complexity of cells and all that, you're communicating information, but information comes from minds. Information is not just randomly generated. Though I think it's a waste of time, but even the SETI project looks for some kind of pattern or rhythm, coming out of space as they're listening with all the satellite antennas, right? So they're listening for a particular pattern. Well, why are they looking for a pattern? Because if there's alien intelligence out there in the universe, then the only thing that can be communicated to represent some form of intelligence coming from a mind has to be some kind of repeatable or logical pattern. Because if it's random and it doesn't mean anything, and they know that, but they know that ahead of time. In other words, there's so many things that are presupposed that oftentimes atheists look for. And they don't realize that they're undercutting their own position. For example, like we were watching a movie the other night, and they were talking about survival of people. They survived. People have survived because it's worked into their biology. It's biological, our ability to think and to survive and everything. Now, my question was, who came up with, survival is the most important thing? I mean, that's what we hear from atheists all the time, that evolution worked in this ability to survive as the premium philosophy, right? So now you got something non-material coming from a material entity, but you have this philosophy of survival coming from random effects, random chemical reactions, over millions of years, and somehow, but why is survival the most important thing? Some atheists would say, well, because we have survived, then it must be survival. But what you're doing is you're assuming what you're trying to prove. You're saying we survived, so survival must have been what we wanted to do. Excuse me. So, but that's not evolution. That's using a logical deduction based on something that happened. That would be like saying, well, if I'm the last person on Earth, then that must be what evolution wanted to do. But evolution is nothing. Evolution doesn't want to do anything. Evolution is a concept. Evolution is not an intelligence, nor does it have any intelligence in it. It is just randomness, random matter acting on matter over, millions of years of time that somehow ended up in this, supreme complexity that gives us the ability to look back and say, oh, this is why it was done. But there is no reason why it's done. There can't be a reason. I mean, can you think of a reason?
No, that's the whole problem with evolution. If we can pick it apart and we can look at all kinds of aspects of it, and there are so many things wrong with it. But like you were just touching on, a very important point about evolution is that it is said to be done blindlessly, without any intelligence, no guiding force behind it. It's just a natural progression. If you look at the complexity that we see in so many living creatures today, that's unfathomable. That's the most ridiculous conclusion that I think a person can make, and it's very unscientific, and I find it very unsatisfying. And I believed in it at one time when I was in high school, and shortly thereafter, I believed evolution was true because that's what I was taught. And I just thank the Lord that I had opportunities to see differently. And there's very intelligent people that are proponents of evolution, and they stand by it. And I can't see it. It's the most ridiculous thing. One of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen, and it just cannot work. And like I said, we could pick it apart all night if we wanted to, but I can encourage anybody who's interested in that to dig in and look at a Norman Geisler book or any of a number of other people.
Turek's book, Stealing from God, is good.
It's very good.
Yeah, that's good.
A.E. Wilder Smith, one of my favorites. That man is brilliant. And if you read his stuff, I don't see how you could reasonably look at it, hear what he has to say, and come away still believing that evolution is...
I liked his book, The Natural Sciences Know Nothing of Evolution.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
He was good for... Had that British humor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just loved his part on protein synthesis. That really just captured me. Protein synthesis and the problems with it, and the generation of life from non-life. It's just a wonderful read, and I encourage anybody to do that. In fact, it was Dean Kenyon, who was one time in the late 60s, early 70s, one of the leading evolutionists in the world. And he wrote a book, if I can recall the name of it, or he was a co-author of a book. The name escapes me. But anyway, he was challenged by one of his students to read a Wilder Smith book. And he took the copy of the book, and he'd get to it when he got to it, and he just figured he'd read it and then go back to the student and dismiss it. And he read the book, and it changed him forever. In fact, after reading the book and thinking about it for some time, I can't remember exactly how long, he called Wilder Smith and said he wanted to meet with him. And he did.
Oh, I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall, huh?
Yeah. But anyway, Dean Kenyon is an interesting story, and I would advise anybody interested to look him up.
Yeah, he has videos, right?
He has videos, yeah.
Yeah. I saw. I've at your recommend. I think a couple of years ago I watched some of his stuff.
Biochemical Predestination. I believe that was the name of the book. It just popped into my head there. Yeah.
Herb and I are old, so we have a tendency to forget things,
Yeah.
And then they pop back.
Yeah.
It's interesting, just kind of turning this back to the resurrection to kind of finish it off. Isn't it interesting that so many people that actually understood, see, these are the guys that were honest enough to say, if I can plug a hole in the resurrection, I can kill Christianity. I can make it go away.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, everybody argues about different things, but the reality is in the first century, if anybody that was the enemy of Christianity had the body of Christ, they could have produced the body and then Christianity would have been dead before it started.
Yeah.
No pun intended, right? And if the disciples had the body and were just fooling people, which did not help their life situation, it actually made it a lot worse. Why a group of people would do that, I have no idea. And why a number of people would die going to the grave saying, I saw the resurrected Christ. I have no idea why they'd do that either. I mean, that would mean that there was insanity on a very large scale. Maybe it was something in the water, but then that would have to spread throughout the last 2,000 years or 1,988 years or whatever. So the point being is that if as a Christian, you need to understand the issues regarding the resurrection, because that is the crux to Christianity. If you are not a Christian, you should read the books of educated people who actually tried to dispel Christianity based on their attack of the resurrection. Men like Frank Morrison, Who Moved the Stone, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Josh McDowell. I know that, there's a whole list of, now I'm having a senior moment. On my shelf, there's a whole bunch of guys that, and some ladies, who have tried to attack the resurrection, but through the actual evidence, the honest look at the evidence, realized that the resurrection either had to take place, or everybody in the first century, even people outside of Christianity, were giving some kind of witness to the fact that no resurrection had a major impact on the world, and still does today. Now, the reason that that's different than any other religious group is because historically, what the New Testament claims can be verified. And obviously, the New Testament is fulfilling what the Old Testament just anticipated. You're connecting them together. But when you do that through eyewitness detail and the documents of the New Testament, along with actual history outside the Bible, like I say, you put this together with archaeology, then and a lot of the archaeological finds for the first century, then you have a very, very powerful case, one that would actually work in court. I actually have a book on my shelf. I forget the woman's name. She was a lawyer, but I think she called it Faith on Trial, where she actually went through, took the evidence for Christianity and took it on trial as though it was like a court case. But that's what people that are actually seeking and are honest with the evidence, what they are trying to accomplish through that. And so to kind of bring this around, I think that if you are curious about that, look, you can always email me, BibleMadeClear@gmail. If you have any questions, I'll provide you whatever information I can. But as far as the resurrection itself, Christianity stands or falls on the resurrection. As a Christian, if you read the New Testament, the next time you go through it, look for how the writers are actually using the resurrection. In other words, obviously that was the focal point of their message in the book of Acts. When you get outside of the Acts and into the epistles, you realize it's the foundation for the epistles. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, especially as Paul makes reference to, then, like Herb had quoted earlier, there's no sense in even, we're wasting our time. There's other things to do on Sundays and Wednesdays, and any other day you would go to church or Bible study. So we really recommend, I would second what Herb is saying. We really recommend that you look into that. And if you're an atheist, especially look into it, because if you take an honest look at the evidence, And again, I think I've done that in the couple of videos that I've done on the evidence for the resurrection. If you can tolerate your way through those, I think that you'll find that it's not as easily dismissed as some people would like people to believe. So let's segue for a second and go into another topic that we've talked about, which is actually Christian growth. We've talked about how when a person first gets saved, seems like there is a lot of the miraculous type of stuff that God does in a person's life. Herb and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, and basically we were talking about how people have Christians generally have a misunderstanding at times of what faith is, and that gets portrayed to non-Christians. So non-Christians also have a misunderstanding of what faith is. Now, faith in the Bible is just the word believe, faith, trust. They're really synonymous. Okay, though they're different Greek words, they really mean the same thing. Essentially, it's trust. And as a Christian, when we first get saved, like I said, when I first get saved, I had things that God changed literally overnight in my life that I started to see taking effect that I did not try to do. And then there were others that he gave me the strength, sinful practices to turn away from that I never had the power to do before. Now that's something that is obviously subjective. It's objective in the sense that that power, at least by my claim, was not there before. And my wife can tell you that it wasn't there before because I was dating her at the time and when I got saved. And then, she saw the change before and after, as well as people that work with me. But as I grew, I didn't know if I was starting to have less faith because it seemed like less things were just kind of happening. Does that make sense? And then, but what I came to the realization is that as I was growing in my understanding of the Word, that God was bringing me to a place of reliance upon what the Bible said and what I needed to believe based on that, as opposed to him just kind of doing the miraculous. Now, I don't want to give the impression that God doesn't do miracles today and that he does not come through miraculously for people. He does all the time. However, like the Israelites had to come to a place of faith that they would actually trust God and take him at his word, I think that he brings Christians through the same process in their spiritual development. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree, and I think that's very true, and I think most of us, I would say, I can't speak for everybody, but we have the same experience in our early life as a saved Christian. It's so much more evident. You see miraculous things happen in your life, quite a few of them. I think, my personal salvation was different than most people, and I remember at first it was just a decision. I had read a lot of stuff and contemplated a lot of things, and I remember just actually reading Stephen Hawking was not the kind of thing you would expect to hear. It's not like going to a...
He's saying we don't recommend that for an apologetics book.
No, we don't. It was just reading through him and what he had to say and thinking about it, and I just came to the conclusion, wow, I had asked God for probably a couple of years. I had been at a point in my life where I was just unsure. How could I know that there was a God? And I guess at that time when I was 18, 19, I would have called myself an agnostic. Kind of sounded cool for one thing, I thought at that time, to be an agnostic. Yeah.
To be an ignoramus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But And then when I got into my early 20s and I was very serious about it. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to say that I believe in God unless I actually believe in God. I wanted to know one way or another. And I did a lot of reading and digging into it. And I prayed, not knowing exactly what I was praying to, being raised a Catholic and all. I had a few odd beliefs, I guess. But I would pray and I would tell God. I remember being in Miles Standish State Forest one day, just kind of walking along. We had the beagles out there, and I remember just as I was walking along, just asking God, just saying, please, just reveal yourself to me. If you're really there, reveal yourself to me that I would know. And it took probably a couple of years after that, and I just reading Stephen Hawking. And it wasn't like I was reading the book, but I read the book, I put it down, I was contemplating it, as I often do, and I just came to the conclusion. I said, you know what? With all the evidence that I have in here and all the reading I've done, I have to just confess he's there. And I was in the Air Force at the time, and I made up my mind, and a friend invited me to a Baptist church, and I went, and this is shortly after that time, actually, and the pastor, towards the end of the service, he said, is there anybody that would like to invite Jesus Christ into their lives? Just raise your hands, and we'll pray for you. And I put my hand up, which is very unlike me. I don't usually participate in such things, but I put my hand up, and he prayed for all of us, and I knew at that time I was saved, and I was saved. Of course, the next weekend, the next Saturday night, you wouldn't have known that, because I remember being at one of our Air Force parties, and I remember probably had a six-pack in me, and I was on probably number 7 by that time, and I was feeling it, and I was witnessing to one of my flight line crew members, and I was witnessing to him, probably staggering and slurring my words a little bit, but I guess I didn't know any better at age 20 or whatever I was, and I got a little bit better after that, and went on for about 15 years after that, kind of being in and out, being saved, not really understanding it at the time, and thinking about sometimes in the past when I've known about people that got saved, and they would say that they felt a warmth, or they felt a light or something. I never felt anything like that, and I was kind of wondering, was it me, or is it them, or what's going on here? And I was saved. He was just letting me do my thing. And then when my father died in 1997, and I moved back home from Georgia, and shortly after that, my mother died. She had ovarian cancer very soon after she was diagnosed, after my father died, and I got up there. And it's a long story, a lot of personal things happening at that time, but I knew that he'd called me back for that purpose, and he made me get serious. And ever since then, I've just been digging into his word the best I can, and it's just been a wonderful ride ever since that time. And I recommend it to any one of you. And you don't know what you're missing if you don't know him.
That's interesting, because I think there are probably a number of people when they get saved, they go through the early parts of their Christianity with, in a sense, almost they don't realize how unsaved they look. I don't know how else to term it. I mean, look, when I first got saved when I was 24, I was actually bouncing in a couple of nightclubs for money, right? And then I got saved, and I realized that, I needed to quit those clubs, so I did. And then, but then I thought, I should be telling my friends about God. So I went out to the clubs, but by the end of the night, I was kind of bouncing off the walls myself, and realized, well, that's probably not a good thing to do. You know,
we should have been teamed up.
Yeah, we would have been teamed up. Yeah, the dynamic duo. Yeah. So, but I think a lot of people go through that. Now, I also, obviously, over the years, and being a pastor for the last 33 years, I see these new believers, and some of them, they get so down on themselves because they fail in some of these areas, and I watch other Christians that are more mature in their faith, sometimes kind of beat them up because they fail, and it's the wrong thing to do. I think new believers need to be encouraged and kind of, brought along. Everybody's going to come along at their own speed, and everybody's speed, I think, is different. Sanctification is not and that's something that we should probably talk about at another time, that whole speed of sanctification. But sanctification is not the same for speed in everybody's life. People mature differently, and they grow at different speeds. Some people start out with a much greater knowledge of God when they get saved, and some have none, zero. So, people are different. People are people. So, I've had new believers come in and talk about, they start beating themselves up, and I say, look, relax. You realized you did something that you shouldn't. Ask God for forgiveness, and then ask for the strength not to go back and do the same thing. In other words, they need to be encouraged to go along, because, look, when I was 2 years old in the Lord, I thought I had all the answers. I had read, I'd gone through the Bible, at a obviously not great depth, and I figured, okay, so now I kind of understand all the doctrines, I know everything, so what else can I learn? I mean, how clueless could I have been, right? But, but I'm still learning. But, as you go along, you realize that God has people at different places, and I think we need to appreciate the work that God is doing in people's lives as opposed to criticizing them for what he has not done yet. And sanctification requires faith, just like salvation. We need to trust God with things. But what I was trusting God with at certain points in my life, and other people not, I wasn't trusting God for things that other people were. And that's why I say everybody's different, and we can't take the convictions of the places that we're at and lay them on other people. Christians need to be able to grow at the pace that they are in their relationship as it's developing with God, and we shouldn't be pushing them to that. But I think that, at least to the point that we're talking about here, as we grow in faith, like in Deuteronomy 13, Moses says, look, if there's a prophet or a dreamer arises among you, shows a sign or a wonder, whatever, it's obviously somebody that's a Jew, they would not listen to people that weren't. So somebody that they think is representable, respected, to follow, whatever, comes up, has a dream or a vision, represents it to everybody. Even if it happens, what they say, if people follow them, but the message deviates from what Moses has put down previous, which is basically it's not biblical, and he said, and as Moses says, the message is to go off and serve other gods. He said the Lord is testing you. He's trying to prove you to see whether you love the Lord your God or not. In other words, are we going to take God at his word, even though we may not see physical effects right now? I think that's the place where God is trying to get Christians to grow to, so that I will base my life based on what's written even more than what I can see, because we live by faith and not by sight. But that doesn't mean faith without evidence. The evidence has already been there because I'm saved. The evidence is there because Jesus rose from the dead. A lot of people are leaving Christianity because they're talking about, I decided that I like this instead of that. They want to get into maybe some form of immorality that Christianity won't allow, that the Bible is against, and so they decide all of a sudden, well, I'm not a Christian anymore. But that doesn't mean that Jesus didn't rise from the dead all of a sudden. That just means that they change their psychological state. And if they do that, that doesn't really mean anything. That just means they're thinking differently. But that has no effect on the evidence for Christianity. And I think people get these things confused. So as we're growing as Christians, and I'll kind of give you the final word on this, Herb, but as we're growing as Christians, I think though God early on in our lives did a lot of work kind of without us asking him to, that came across miraculously, really, at least to me, then, after a while, like your term is, he takes the training wheels off, and he wants us to take him at his word, because that's where the faith is developed. Because, like Paul says, if I can see what I'm hoping for, and when Paul uses the word hope, he means of a certainty. It's not like, gee, I really hope this happens. Like, I hope they show up when they said they'd be here. But it's a certainty. So Paul says, if I can see what I've hoped for, then like I have it. Like there's no need for faith then, because, but faith is trusting that what God says is going to happen or is true. Do you follow?
I do.
Where I'm trying to go on that?
Yeah.
So I'll give you the final word, and then we can.
Well, you're right. It's all based on faith, and what he does in our lives. Once you're a believer, he strengthens you. He's not done with you yet. It's a constant process right up until the very end, until he calls you home. He's working in your life. He's strengthening you. He's preparing you for what he has for you next. And, like we were talking about it earlier, as you mentioned, when you're first saved, you have all these things happen and everything seems new to you. And then that's not so much anymore. And what believers say is that they go through peaks and valleys. There are times, and I've certainly had these times myself, where the Lord just seems so far away. And you cry out to him and you say, where are you? And the truth is, he's just expecting you to stand. You're not a baby anymore, is what he's saying. You're not a baby. Stand up and deal with these things. You have my word. You know how I feel about you. You know what I'll do for you. I'm always there. I just don't need to be holding your hand all the time, is basically what's happening. And we get stronger as we go. And the peaks and valleys that we speak of as Christians, they're not so much anymore. I guess we all have times, and probably always will be, where we just, we want them right there. And as I often tell people, when I get frustrated about things that are going on, and it can be things that are going on in the world, in the country right now, personal things that go on in your life, like with my family, I have a lot of desire for them and all, and meeting with different family members, talking to them. I tell people I would love so much to get up in the morning, get myself a cup of coffee, sit down at the kitchen table with Jesus, and him tell me everything to do, exactly what to say.
Yeah.
And believe me, I would do exactly what he told me to do and say what he wanted me to say. But it doesn't work like that. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? But it doesn't work like that. He just he asks us to. Let me rephrase that. He does tell us that he gives us his word. It's right there. We can read it anytime we want to, and he's basically telling us just how to behave, what to say, and he's always there with us. So we can't go without him.
And I think it's important to note, as we're talking about this, faith, because it's trust, is not it. It's not just. Faith is not just like trusting in nothing and just having it. It always has to have an object. Faith has to have an object. There needs to be an object of faith. Mm-hmm. And in saying that, faith is not feelings. I think a lot of times, especially when we go through difficulty, we want to feel God because we're human. There's a natural comfort. I mean, when I saw Herb, I hugged him. Okay, we haven't seen each other in a year, so and there's there's feelings in that embrace, but at the same time, if I was going through a hard time, friends, my wife hugging me. There's a comfort in that, knowing that there's somebody there with you. And I think a lot of times we try to feel God but he's not there in a sense to hug. Now, other people in the body of Christ are there, and they kind of become his arms in hugging us to go through whatever it is we're going through. But at the same time, it would be a mistake to think that God is not with us because we cannot feel him. God is with us all the time. His word tells us that he'll never leave us or forsake us. Hebrews 13, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's not going to change. He's always going to be faithful. He's faithful to his word. He's faithful to who he is, right? The truth. And so, though I can't feel him the way I would like to at times, I know the fact that he is there. Just like I know that, we're going to go upstairs in a couple of minutes here, and I know Herb's going to cook dinner on the grill.
That's the plan.
Yeah, and I know that, I know our wives are waiting upstairs. I know that I don't need to see them to worry about whether they left, So there are certain things that we don't have to worry about, I guess, in a sense. And when we go through difficulty, we start to kind of mentally lose footing at times, but Jesus is still there with us. And, we need to remember that, especially as we're growing. So, look, we talked about the resurrection. There's more than ample evidence for that. We talked about that in reference to atheism and into Christians understanding more about it, because this is the foundation of why we are here today, and it's the foundation of our faith. Without the resurrection, there is no Christianity, bottom line. Secondly, we talked a little bit about faith and spiritual growth and how God expects us to take him at his word instead of just trying to feel him. And we need to give all Christians, place to grow at their own pace and not try to kind of force feed people or whatever. But I do think that Christians grow best as they just continue to go book by book through the Bible, learning the Bible itself as opposed to just Bible topics. It's so important to learn the Bible in that way.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And again, we both come from obviously the same Calvary Chapel. Herb now goes to Calvary Chapel up here in Bangor, but again, it's the same method of teaching through the Bible, and that way it's a safety precaution in a sense, because if you have a steady diet of expositional teaching through the Bible, then you're actually learning the Bible. You're learning it in context. The teacher can't veer off because you see what they're reading, so they can't just kind of dunk a topic here or there. Now, after you know the Bible, topics are great because then you know where they fall in within the context of Scripture and how they should be understood theologically, so or eschatologically or whatever, wherever the topic is. So, anyways, I appreciate your time today, Herb.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
So, for everybody, as we say each time as we end the video, may God richly bless you as you continue to study his word.